All right, so let me begin the slideshow. So the title for today's presentation is a COVID-19 and the impacts on First Nation women's safety. It's knowledge gathering and sharing. The term is used to basically and essentially decolonize the term study. So that's what the slide is presenting. So the objective of the study and the funding, the study's objective was to evaluate whether the current Nasim Menon's Safe Ride program is providing the best safety response for First Nation women. So the study was actually funded through the UCN Seed Grant, and the project ended April 16th of 2021. The research was conducted by myself and Pauline. So there's actually a story to this. This research was actually inspired by Pauline, and it began in September 21st, 2019. And Nasim Menon's translation is Our Little Sister. So I'm going to give the floor, or like the speaking stage, to Pauline to speak a little bit more about the origination of this particular Safe Rides and how this, came to be within her scope.
Sorry, I'm just pulling up my information.
Yeah, for sure. Go ahead.
Okay, the Simenon Safe Rides was actually initiative that was created from myself and some fellow students that I was going to school with at UCN. I do a lot of volunteer work in the PA-OCN and worked as volunteered as an active lead for the OCN Bear Clan Patrol. Through my employment, we had OCN Bear Clan Patrol in OCN, and at the time when the late Kendera Ballantyne was missing, her family had approached our group to search for her, because that was some of the stuff that the Bear Clan Patrol does, is they look for missing people. And met with a couple of the aunties who actually raised Kendera, and sat with them and came up with a plan, like an actual mapping of the areas that they wanted us to cover as a group. So we did that, and actually on the first night that we went out, we had 2 groups going out, and as well as a family, and had discovered remains that did in fact belong to Kendera. But we didn't get confirmation on that until 3 weeks later. But we still had to treat it as a missing person, and we still continued our search for her after the fact. But when I was speaking to Noreen about the experience that we had as a group, we had called, because I was the one who was the lead. I had to make the calls, the crisis calls. I had to speak to the police because we worked with a lot of vulnerable women and people. I made the call, and they sent one officer over. He went to check, and I had my group there, and he confirmed that it was human remains. And then I told her that the experience that we had as a group was very negative. It was like we were instantly treated like we were criminals.
Really?
We were not. We were all separated. We were all taken to the police station to do statements, and we were all asked why we were searching for a person, what we were doing, which actually traumatized further my group of volunteers. With the Bear Clan Patrol, while we were in operation, had really extensive training working in crisis. So this is why a lot of people approached us to do this type of work. Police, though I understand their job and their role, but still the experience was really upsetting, and I had to call the chief at the time to let him know what was going on. And with his support, we called Beatrice Wilson Health Center to set up debriefing for my team. So we would be able to sit together and debrief after our experience with policing and then discovering this young girl. With that being said, I had come back to school and had some discussions with women and talking about the safety in our community, because we had several young women who were found in the town of The Pas who were either murdered or gone missing. And it was becoming an issue, especially for our Indigenous women. So we talked about having a Safe Rides program. Asked me how I would set it up and how I would get it together. So I contacted James Favel with the Bear Clan Patrol, and he referred me to a woman in Winnipeg who was doing a Safe Rides program as well, but they were for profit. So I did some research and had some discussions with her too. And then combining all the experience we had as volunteers, because we had a lot of crisis experience in our backgrounds, how we were going to set it up and how we were going to deliver it. So we launched it in September in the fall, which was perfect for a lot of students coming into UCN, and a lot of Indigenous students, especially young ones that have never been in a large urban center. So we were out and we were handing out cards. We were seeking donations. We were letting them know what we were doing. And then we would work in teams of 2 when we would drive, and we would use our own vehicles. And pretty soon we provided a little over 300 rides when we were in operation before COVID had hit. But it was every weekend. We would do Fridays and Saturdays from 11 o'clock till 5 in the morning. And pretty soon we were doing a lot of crisis work. So the value in it was really important. And it took a while for us to expand to the non-Indigenous community, but it did work. And then we were servicing the tri communities, the OCN, the PA, and the RM of Kelsey. And with that, we were connecting with resources. So we were getting stuff from the health center, we were getting stuff from primary health, and we're handing out resources to women, condoms, pamphlets, stuff like that, whatever they needed when they were out. So we were building a connection and a network, and we were doing crisis work at the same time. I don't know what else you want me to say, Noreen, because there's lots of examples I could share while we were doing the Safe Rides.
Right.
So
I think what we can do is you can add to it once we proceed further as well. So I know there's a lot there. So okay.
Yeah, there's
so
a lot,
basically, yeah. So there's a lot of layers. So basically the inception was, as you can see, was a long standing issue within the community, and many communities when it comes to First Nation women's safety. So the purpose was to obviously get the information. Has this increased existence of safety for First Nations women who are residing? This was a specific location, so in OCN and the PA. So that was where we were, trying to get the information, because that's where the Safe Rides are being offered. So COVID-19 impacts on Nasimenon's Safe Rides mandate, research participants, and the study itself. So Nasimenon's Safe Rides program operated as an option for women to reach their destination safely at the late hours in the night. So with the pandemic having forced the closures of sites such as bars and restricted social gatherings, the need was actually reevaluated. So the program's mandate was adjusted to assist women for transport during the pandemic at various times throughout the day and night. So they opened that service. However, The program's new mandate could not be fully utilized due to the lockdown restrictions. The study was directly impacted by the pandemic, lockdowns, and curfews, since only quote unquote essential services were allowed to operate. And we can already see the problem within that. So since the Safe Rides program was not considered an essential service, sorry, I can't really see, sorry, I need to move this along. Since they weren't allowed to operate during lockdowns, Pauline attempted to offer rides and sought to have the program be reconsidered and reclassified as an essential service. Unfortunately, that request was not fulfilled. This placed limitations for both the program and for First Nations women, not being able to access this service. So there was a major block. So now data collection. Data collection became complex with the unpredictability of lockdown durations, not showing how long this is going to take, with research participants aborting their involvement for various reasons, the ones we had already had involved within this research. So with the Nisimanon Safe Rides not being allowed to operate, the original process for spreading the study's information by directly providing a card to current and new riders was no longer a viable option, because originally the idea was when a person has a ride, a card is provided in terms of providing information on the study that we're doing. We would like to hear from you. That no longer was an option. So to combat this issue, social media platforms were used to share the study's information, and a really important part here, and to request past riders for their participation. So in the data collection breakdown, we had 20 participant responses by First Nations women, and the participant demographic and criteria was as follows. They must identify as a First Nation woman. Age range was open between 18 to 60. They must reside, in OCN or the PA, be a previous rider of Nisimanon's Safe Rides, and have access to the internet. So this actually became an additional characteristic for participant participation. The lack of internet and telephone access further exemplified the inequality that existed among First Nations women within the study. So we knew that that was already going to be a limit, which I'll discuss within limitations. So key findings here. So as the responses were coming through and having to dissect the information, what became clear was there were 4 themes that became were part of the responses. So out of those numbers are indicating response numbers. All 20 responses spoke about security. All 20 responses spoke about protection. All 11 responses spoke about prevention, and 7 hit on freedom. So let me break that down. So in terms of, the key findings, some respondents within, some of the things I will share or that we found was some respondents indicated past traumas and how this service would have prevented those outcomes, so hence the prevention of it, that if something like this existed, this trauma or this traumatic event would not have occurred. The protective and preventative aspect of the service was highlighted through sentiments such as, quote, offers peace of mind to families who can feel comfort in knowing that their loved one will safely reach their destination. The driver being a female gender increased a sense of security, and I should also clear that up, is that 2 people were sent out. Oftentimes had both genders, but having the female present increased sense of security. Preference for a free ride from a known person, such as friends, family, and an acquaintance was stated. However, the problem of availability, reliability, and financial ability, and so on, among the woman's known contacts often resulted in no rides. Some indicated, that the Safe Rides option saves them from the anxiety of having to use a cab. And we will look at this a little bit further, because there was a split in the responses when it came to the feeling of safety while using a cab at night, or makes unsafe decisions to either walk alone or accept rides from strangers offering a lift. Sorry, I'm trying to move this page over. Oh. There we go. Previous, okay. So then we could see a shaping of hierarchy. So in the hierarchy of high risk choice preference, calling a cab actually outweighed walking and obtaining free rides from random individuals. However, the preference was subject to finances. So if you didn't have that, then many deal with financial restraints whereby the only alternatives are unsafe options. Like, what are you supposed to do in that situation? So to walk or accept rides from people they may not know. While the cab option was preferred, it still fell into the category of unsafe options for 50% of the respondents. All presented choices to reach their destination fell into the category of high risk. This nuance in security of movement and transportation access for First Nations women is a pivotal finding. So one of the things that was quite of interesting and confirmation for many who are living within this reality is the vehicle ownership did not correlate with safety. Many respondents who owned a vehicle did not have money for gas. So transportation options for many were dependent on the availability of rides offered by family or friends, as I stated, which is highly unreliable. So negative impacts of COVID-19. The pandemic, restrictions and lockdowns with the closures of non-essential services and adjusted business hours affected access for many who did not have transportation. It became more challenging to obtain rides for essential items and services such as buying groceries, going to the bank to pay bills, visiting a doctor, and in some severe cases, not being able to leave a dangerous situation. Some respondents stated that the pandemic affected their mental health and the lack of transportation intensified their mental health issue. This was compounded by the fact that they were unable to visit family members, the socially distanced visit, whom they were concerned about and whom, and one participant stated they felt helpless because you basically are imprisoned. Also, one respondent indicated that they had contracted COVID-19 and did not have any right to pick up food. Many also felt very secluded and isolated. The pandemic exacerbated the already existent restriction in the freedom of movement. For those women whose accessibility was tied to an already undependable ride schedule, that was reliant on family and friends, became even more unreliable because of the pandemic. So it often resulted in having no ride, whereby the individual will have to resort to either asking for money for a cab, going on social media to ask for a ride from strangers, or having to walk if distance allowed. And another aspect here was many were saying that, even trying that, finding accessible transportation could actually take days. So another obstacle mentioned in the responses were cab drivers selecting who they will allow to be a customer. So as one respondent stated, taxi drivers choose who they pick up. Women, girls, and Two-Spirit people end up accepting rides from anyone. The Safe Rides program was mentioned as a needed essential service for those who were in domestic abusive situations. Some respondents indicated the lack of trust of the RCMP when it came to calling them for help. The CMNON Safe Ride service was stated as the ideal option for them. So what's really of interest and quite frankly disturbing, and a lot of the only term that we can come up with here is that there was a positive COVID-19 restriction effect. So while safety is still a concern with the lack of safe rides for women, there was actually a positive aspect here. Many respondents reported that the lockdown was actually a good thing. Some felt that as a female gender, they were also much safer with the restrictions, As one participant mentioned, less access, more safe. Some other responses were, yes, positive changes. I do not go to local bars. Quote, curfew hours help keep younger women from walking around after 10 p.m. It has helped keep communities safer with checkpoints. We know who is entering and leaving. And also it taught us to be careful. So this is a charted, charted aspect to how an unsafe situation most likely occurs for First Nation women and girls. So in the middle here at, number 1 is the First Nations woman. And then 2 is, if you go left, there's, cash. So if a person has cash and they own their own vehicle, that's the most ideal option, then they're going to be safe. But if they have cash and they choose a cab, there's actually a safety risk. So you have, again, as I mentioned, this has been a big part of the responses. Then if you go down to number 2 and there's, a cell phone with all these people, contacting, friends and family, and if they're available, they're again safe. But comparing it to the Nisiminon's safe rides and the importance, if you just go right, and all they have to do is call Nisiminon safe ride and they're safe. They don't have to go through the obstacles that have been created through the systemic issues and aspects that they exist in to be safe. If you look at the question mark and number 4, factors increasing the unsafe risk is no financial access, unreliable family friends, no free safe ride service available, unreliable cab taxi if driver does not pick them up, and not feeling safe taking a cab. So that in itself has been a dichotomy within the cab relationship, cab companies and that relationship. So if you look at the circles here, that full colored circle means all respondents unanimously stated that Nassim Menon's safe rise was essential. If you look at family and friends, there was just a certain percentage that felt that was preferred, but it was unreliable. And the cab ride was literally a 50-50 split of feeling unsafe or safe. So limitations within the study, COVID-19 restrictions severely limited the potential for more participants to join the study. First Nations women pass riders who had no internet access were automatically excluded from the knowledge sharing opportunity. The same pool was further narrowed with pass riders being the main selection criteria for recruitment. And while the non-operational status for Nassim Menon Safe Ride was a constraint, the lack of service assisted in extenuating the vulnerable status of safety experienced by First Nations women. So I'm going to touch on that a little bit more. So in the discussion, so the frequency and probability for a First Nations woman being coerced into selecting an unsafe and high risk option provides a deeply intimate lens in relation to the structural and systemic levels of insecurity. While access to transportation is problematic for anyone living in vulnerable conditions, the variance in access, discrimination, and the socioeconomic conditions should be further researched. While correlation was not directly made between the lack of safe rides and missing and murdered Indigenous women, the participants' responses assumed causation automatically between safe transportation and prevention of missing and murdered Indigenous women. A negative correlation between owning a vehicle and not being safe due to the lack of finances further illustrated the socioeconomic barriers and restrictions First Nations women reside within. Having no money for gas essentially sabotaged their safety, something that we seem to take for granted. Another dimension uncovered was COVID-19's positive impact on First Nations women's security. It provides a valuable insight into understanding the unsafe structural reality First Nations women have to navigate. The pandemic restrictions being viewed by respondents as protective and becoming the means for their security while simultaneously eliminating their freedom for mobility demonstrates a systemic dysfunction. The lockdown being a safety protocol for combating the pandemic, yet inadvertently becoming a protective portal for First Nations women's security indicates a highly problematic structural component which needs to be further investigated. The pandemic also exacerbated the socioeconomic fragility and unsafe options. These economic conditions for First Nations women, their families, and communities creates a hub for unattainable safe mobility and movement selection. So this is just not about the First Nations women, it's about the communities. Because again, too, if you don't have the finances, if you don't have the support, if you don't have the resources, one cannot help each other out. The study also revealed the dichotomy faced by First Nations women. On one hand, the cab drivers are being selective in choosing customers. And on the other hand, there is immense distrust in taking a cab during the night. So it's a very, unusual imbalance and relationship. Along the same pattern is the inherent fear in contacting the police when in need of assistance. These two aspects show an inherent flaw within the societal dynamic. Feeling threatened with what should be a relatively safe interaction adds another layer of oppression for the First Nations women's experience. Training and initiatives should be utilized within the police force and among cab companies with the information provided within the study. Inclusion of First Nations women and First Nation communities in training development is highly pertinent. Additionally, a concerted effort in reducing harm without resorting to limiting the freedom of movement for First Nations women should be an important consideration for OCN, the PAW, and overall Canadian society. So in conclusion, we explore the perspectives of, whether if the service had increased safety, and unequivocally is substantiated that Indeed, Naseem Anan Safe Ride is a vital service leader for security, prevention, protection, and freedom for First Nations women. Again, sadly, the only safest option independently was a person who owns a vehicle and who has money for gas. While COVID-19 restrictions created challenges, it revealed a broken and insecure system First Nations women struggle and attempt to survive, literally, within. Future studies along the same vein are critical in revealing the intricacies that facilitate unsafe conditions and options for First Nations women. So basically, thank you for that. I'm going to allow Pauline to continue the discussion and share whatever else she wishes when it comes to her study. I do also want to say that I am so proud, with Pauline's effort. She was the one actually who came to me with this topic. She was in my feminist course, and we began looking at the topic of missing and murdered Indigenous women. And then she had told me that she had began this independently, began this rights service. And from there, through discussions, we decided to do a study. So I just want to actually applaud her on this, because it would never have been a topic. It would never have been a very insightful exploration. So I wanted to say thank you for that. But I will give, Pauline the floor to add anything else that she wishes that is important.
Thank you. From the launch of Naseem Anan Safe Rides that I was explaining, on a typical night that we would go out, and it would all strictly be volunteers. We'd be equipped with a bag that we would take. We would wear protective gear like a vest, just to identify who we were. We had a book to record names, times, and pick up and drop off locations of women, and hand sanitizers, condoms, paper towel, garbage bags, Lysol wipes. We were housed with two-way radios. So if I had 3 vehicles out, that'd be 6 of us out, because we had 2 per vehicle. We would communicate by radio and cell phone if we were out of a jurisdiction, like if we had to go to the lake or somewhere. We had people sign a confidentiality agreement to protect the identities of the women who were accessing safe rides. We'd meet up before we'd go out, and we'd have a plan of action for the night. Usually we would do patrols for the entire community of the PAW, OCN, the Yarra-McKelsey. So we were just driving around. We weren't waiting for a call. We would go out and go through the bars, the casino, anywhere there was alcohol being served, anywhere there would be women, and we would hand out cards and let them know we were out driving for the night. We would check every business. We would go to the gas stations. We would let them know if somebody comes and they need a ride to call us. We had a Facebook page as well, where messages would come through our group page, and the volunteers that were passengers would be checking the Facebook page looking for women requesting rides. They would also record the name of the first name of the woman, the time, the pickup, and the destination. We were always in constant communication with each other. If anything happened that was critical that needed police assistance, I would be the one to come in and talk with my group. And then we would make communication with the police or the hospital. 300 plus rides for women who made it home safe to their families, loved ones, daughters, sisters, mothers, who were protected through our Safe Rides program on the weekends. The high volume of calls that typically came in were around the time when the bars would close. Around 2 a.m. to 5 a.m. would be our most busy time. And this is where we would see a lack of police presence in the community. I'm not sure how that's going to change now with OCN having their own First Nations policing now, because they're very active in our community now. So I'm actually going to be presenting this to them too as well, because they're going to work directly with me when this launches again. I really hope that I can be able to do that with the RCMP in town, because it's dealing with the town of the PAW and the Yarra-McKelsey. Volunteers comprised of local students, community members, extensive training in the areas of trauma and violence, first aid, CPR, mental health, first aid, First Nations, applied suicide intervention training, mental health counseling skills, applied counseling skills, and they were in the process of getting training through the MKO Mobile Crisis Response Unit, where they were going to be establishing a crisis team within the Safe Rides program. So they were trained very well to provide this service, and we ensured that we made sure like the women were feeling safe and comfortable whenever a situation happened. Examples of situations that we encountered while on patrol. Safe Rides offered a ride for a 14-year-old female who was followed by a group of men. The young woman did not know the men were following her, and she accepted a safe ride. Another example, one Safe Ride encountered one serious sexual assault, and team members worked quickly to provide safety for the woman and located, with local health, and RCMP were involved. Thankfully, with the support and the help with the young woman, was able to provide a statement, and RCMP were able to lay charges. A third one was the youngest person to access Safe Rides is a 9-year-old female, where domestic abuse in her place and the safety concern was we take her from her place and into a place of safety and a connection with the local CFS agency. So that was beginning for that. So there was a lot of value in providing the Safe Rides within the community. And it was not also for that, but to also reduce the exploitation and the violence that was occurring, and harm reduction to help bring our women home safe. Also, Safe Ride it hasn't been quiet, because in the downtime I have been going into Saskatchewan and working with FILU, with the Federation of Saskatchewan Indian Nations, and that's their Indigenous liaison unit, where they have family members that are missing right now, like active cold cases. So I've been presenting this ride, Safe Rides, the Seaman Safe Rides, to them as well in the large urban centers where a lot of our women are coming out of CFS care and they're vulnerable and they're being exploited. So they're looking at running a Safe Rides program in their areas that follow the same model, where they can keep their women safe as well. And my only thing that I request for this Safe Rides program is that it's free, that it's that our women are accessing safety. So the work is expanding, and it's been really rewarding, and I didn't think it would go as far as it has, and it's actually hopefully it'll go further. I know we have a lot of incidents in Winnipeg where we have a lot of our Indigenous women that are dealing with cab rides, and so this will help too as well. So hopefully it'll be, once it goes through MKO, hopefully it could expand down into the south. So it's been busy even with COVID happening, so it's still being passed on to other communities, and hopefully you can launch it nationally. So that's a dream. But I've been connecting well with a lot of people, so it's a good program.
Okay, thank you, Pauline. Any questions for any of us at this point? Yeah, so as you know, basically, I think everyone during COVID, a lot of things had really for us during the research, this was a major headache for us, because suddenly restrictions kicked in, and like, how are we supposed to do this research? And it's great that we did, because we were able to see. Oh, Katrine, you have a question? Sorry, we were able to see the impacts a bit more clearly. Katrine, yeah, go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah. You know what? I think Sophie had a question also, because he had his hand raised.
Oh, sorry. I am so.
Yeah, no, I don't want to cut in line ahead of Sophie.
Sorry.
So ask his question. That's great.
Yeah, sure. Okay, Sophie, go ahead, and then we'll go to Katrin.
Hi, thank you very much. Thank you, Katrin. But I didn't have a question. I was trying to give that reaction that was for clapping. So I don't know if I pressed the wrong, So yeah. Thank you anyway. But it was a very good presentation, and I believe the initiative is really, really inspirational and important, especially in these times. So yeah, but I mean, yeah, Yeah, thank you very much, sir.
Okay, sorry, I just assumed that that was a question there, Zolfi. I just wanted to thank you, ladies. This was a really good presentation. I think the project that you had in that program that you're developing, Pauline, fantastic. So bravo to you. I think we see and we hear all of the negative sort of negativity around Indigenous women taking cabs in the bigger centers like Winnipeg. There's a lot of risk there associated with that. I think in general also just women in general have a higher risk in terms of taking cabs. So I completely appreciate that from a variety of perspectives. You said you want this program to be free, right? So I'm assuming then, you know, it's just a free pickup if someone calls and requests a ride, like a free ride. So from there, I'm wondering, how is the program being funded? So because you're having to provide some, you know, a vehicle to provide a safe ride. So to be able to spend money on gas to be able to handle that. So I'm just wondering where the funding for this is coming from, or you're looking at getting.
What we have done is we approached organizations within our community and asked for donations. And instead of accepting cash donations for fuel, we would request that they purchase gas cards, and our drivers were fine with that. And they're using their own vehicles. But what we did do was we approached MPI and asked about coverage to see what type of coverage we could have for passengers when we're transporting them. And they knew here in the paw of our initiative, and they gave us some suggestions how we could, in the event of an accident, they would be protected as well. So they saw the value and the importance of the Safe Rides program, but a lot of it is done through volunteer, and we are using our own vehicles, and a really positive response from the community, because a lot of the women, they know the issues going on, so they are helping out that way. So what my plan is, I know I said that I wanted to launch it nationally, but to give it to another community where they feel they could operate the way, and to model it, I guess, after the same program that we're running in our community, so it expands for other places. Ours strictly only ran on the weekends, so we would take Fridays and Saturdays and we would go out and do that. We wouldn't do it all week. It was just on the weekends we would provide that service.
Do you see it expanding to a week-long service at some point, Pauline?
Yes, I did talk to the CFS agencies and the directors, and they see that because they do have a lot of young youth that go AWOL, and they're always searching for them. And then they connect with the police, and then that too, because you have to build a level of trust with people in the community. And a lot of the young people, because like I made that example of that young girl that I would pick up because the situation that was happening in her home for safety, she knew my number, and I would tell her to go to a place to use the phone, and as soon as that number showed up on my phone, and it was during the week in the evening, I'd see that number and I know right away it was my young driver, and I would pick it up and she'd be waiting for me at this place where I'd pick her up. And it was usually a place where I would say where there's people around, and I tell her to wait for me, and she would access a Safe Ride. And that was during the week too. I didn't care if it was a weekend, especially for her. And but that level of trust needs to be developed. And with that being said, I've talked to the agencies, and they see that value in providing the service all week. But modeling it, I guess, the same way that we were approaching the Safe Rides program, especially for the agencies, because a lot of our youth are exploited, and it's happening in our communities. So, and they see that. So.
Well, I'm glad that the agencies like MPI are seeing the value here for that, right? So I think that's really important. So bravo. Yes, so thank you for answering my questions.
Okay.
Okay, so thank you. Anyone else with questions or comments or?
Just quick question. Thank for the good program. And that just reminded me several years ago that I asked for a campus safety walk while I was teaching at night until 9 at night, and just accompany me to to the place where I live. And UCN doesn't have that resources, and according to UCN policy, they are not responsible. So I felt really disappointed, and I see your power to initiate, to get this program going, and which is not easy program. But how can you make it accessible? Like through media, everybody knows this service, and through community, how everybody knows?
We've done we have a Facebook group, like a page, where we would have information posted there and how to access a safe ride. To expand it weekly though, I'm not sure, because a lot of us are students, a lot of us are working, we have families. That's why we strictly left it to the weekends. And especially in our community, but I could see it in a larger urban center where there's funding that's accessible for them. Because I'm pretty sure, I know it's Saskatchewan, that there is funding available for a program like this, especially with, because on the side of Safe Rides, delivering Indigenous perspective on sexual exploitation and safety for Indigenous women, and working with families who are missing loved ones. And that's what I do. And then we incorporate some of the Safe Rides aspect to it, and how it all works together, and how we get resources together. And then the Safe Rides becomes a really important part of that, to help to reduce that amount of missing, murdered Indigenous youth and women. I can see it happening, but it would have to, I don't know. It's the time that comes, and then you'll have to think about paying somebody to be doing it, somebody that's trained in crisis. Because definitely crisis, you have to have a background in crisis to definitely do something like this. Because I know when we had a lot of people volunteering, they didn't realize the amount of work that we were doing, because they thought that they were just driving as a volunteer for like just driving around, but they were seeing the actual work that we were doing behind the scenes. So it sounds good. I hope that something can happen full time. Yeah, but for now, for our area anyway, I don't know if that's going to happen.
Has any the security issue come to those volunteers? Like they work the night, right? So when they were on their own, so have any incident that happened to them?
We've never had to work alone. We've always worked in pairs. Never.
Okay.
I would never send a driver out alone. Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. They would never be alone. There would always be 2 of us or 4 of us. There would always be 2 together. There is a situation that happened with one of my drivers on my night off, where she had got a call from the Legion where a woman was sexually assaulted, and she had called me right away to come and see her. So I had told her to park her vehicle at home. I picked her up, and then we together went to see the woman who was assaulted, and we advocated for her to speak to the police and go to the hospital, but she would not go without me coming with her, because of the lack of services that we get as Indigenous women. And I saw it for myself, how they were treating her right away when we got to the hospital, and then they were questioning me who I was and what I was doing. And then they explained, after I told them what I was doing, that the police had to come in and do the rape kits and all of this stuff that people are really not aware of. For my drivers, that That's why the trauma and the experience and the training is really important, because a lot of our passengers that are being affected this way feel safe, that they can speak to the hospital, they could talk to the police. And they know that we're out there, that we're a presence out there, and we're watching out for our own. So I'm hoping that it will continue. I know it will. People are asking already. But for other areas, they can develop it and create it into their own model and how their communities are, because we're all different. And they know the needs and what's going on in their communities. So, but it is a really valuable initiative. I forgot to say that the Nasimanan, I've been trying to teach Noreen how to say but it was named after Candera Ballantyne, and her two aunties that raised her were the ones who I gave the option that, well, I asked them to name our Safe Rides program, and they did. And that's what we dedicated it to and for. So, and because we deal with that all the time. So I forgot to say that when I was talking about that earlier.
That's okay. Katrin, did you want to go? Yes.
It seems to be I've got a lot of, I think this is a fantastic program. So that's why I've got a lot of questions. So you'd mentioned volunteers, they're doing the driving. They work in pairs, sometimes up to 4 people in a vehicle, which is great.
No, two per vehicle, up to 4 vehicles going.
Oh, 2 per vehicle, up to 4 vehicles going. Okay, sorry. Yeah. You had mentioned that, sometimes volunteers, they think that they're only going to be driving, that you wish that they had some trauma training. So that brings me then to my question, actually. Do you, as this program, if you do want to increase volunteers for driving and helping out, do you provide training, or do you recommend that volunteers would certain training to be able to help and volunteer with this program if you want to grow it? Because I imagine if you want to grow, you're going to need more drivers, right? So then, so that's my question. So are you already providing training, or is that part of sort of that vision down the line?
When we established the Safe Rides program, I wanted volunteers to have a prereq. They had experience dealing with social issues in our community.
Okay.
Yeah. And then when people volunteered, we'd get them to sign a consent form. And then when we meet to have our gathering, then we'd have we would just meet and have a plan. Every night we were out, the new volunteers, we would just give them a briefing, and they would go with a experienced person. They would never just drive on their own. So that person that they were riding with would have that training. And then if a situation happened and I was across town, they would call me and we would be together. We would come in, we would work together that night. So we wouldn't just put people in a vehicle and say, take it on. No, we wouldn't. And then and we see the value, because part of the research before we launched it, we had to ensure that people had a background in trauma and experience.
So would that be as part of an interview process?
No,
no.
We would ask them to list what kind of training they had. And when they fill out that consent form, that confidentiality form, we would get them to sign. And we explained to them why we were doing it, and why if we were picking up vulnerable women, their safety and the confidentiality was important to be a volunteer. So if they had any kind of training that would help us, then that was more, it was really welcomed.
All right.
Okay, so I'm just looking at the time. So I know I have a class, but I don't know if anyone else does. But hopefully, thank you so much, first of all, for coming and listening to us. Thank you, Pauline, for all of your insight and hard work, and of course, the initiative that you have created. It's so important. I mean, it's a consensus here that it is not only, as Zulfi mentioned, and some others as well, it's inspiring, and it's sadly needed. But it's
Yeah.
great that you're able to fill that gap at this point in time. So that is basically it for today. If anyone has any other further questions or comments, please do, state those options. But again, thank you so much for your time.
Very inspiring.
Thank you. Yes, very inspiring. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Welcome.
And I really see Indigenous women powerful.
Yeah.
Had a good teacher. Had a classmate stop me the other day. She gave me a big hug and she said, I heard about your presentation in class today with Noreen. And I went, whoa, and she was just hugging me.
Thank you very much again for
Yeah.
both.
Yeah.
To present the
you.
topic.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Keep up the good work,
Noreen.
Colleen.
Thanks,
Yeah, thank
Noreen.
you.
Noreen.
Take care. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye,
Thank you.
everyone. Thank you so much.